hopefully, I guess we need to get this. We got the screen with the big guide here. So thank you for attending. Hopefully, we'll get Honorary Depew from Fort Collins also to join. But we had kind of been in email discussions with other communities because we're wanting to, learn and not reinvent. So what we're in hopes of doing is getting some positions here in the city of Pueblo to look after climate issues or energy issues. I don't think that the name has actually been defined. So we wanted to kind of get your ideas on how to get going. There's been some recent discussion here in the city to get a part-time person, but there's so much to do that I imagine that's going to turn into an office. Teresa and Jonathan, we wanted to kind of get your ideas, and maybe we'll just kick it off with Teresa. Maybe you can introduce yourself, tell us what you're doing, and then give us an idea of how in Pueblo you think we should get moving on these activities.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate being asked. Let's see. So Golden's program started in 2007, and after City Council had several goals and a lot of input from the community, about 200 pages worth of input from the community, City Council decided to ask for a dedicated full-time staff position. That kind of came hand in hand with an advisory board that they seated of members of the community, residents of Golden. So, I guess we didn't start with part-time. We started with full-time, but there's probably a lot of benefit in there with having somebody dedicated to apply for resources like grants and funding. There's more grants out there than there ever has been in the last 15 years that I've seen. So having somebody dedicated to apply for those grants and secure funding can absolutely eclipse whatever you're going to pay that person. But I think more importantly, part of, and I think I've sent to you, let me know if you didn't get it, but there's a couple of things that I had sent along, which kind of speaks to the justifying of a position for sustainability. But kind of off topic from that document is a bit more about having somebody be able to focus on leading and prioritizing projects. There tends to be a lot of wild and crazy and innovative ideas that come out of a community, and having somebody be able to help prioritize, establish a strategic plan, which is kind of long range, establish maybe a work plan that might be a shorter range, like a year, and getting kind of everybody's buy-in to here are the projects that we're going to tackle first. Here are where the wild and crazy ideas fit into the plan, and that people can kind of all transparently see where and when those projects are going to come up for addressing. So that's kind of in a nutshell kind of where we're coming from. And in Golden, we spent a lot of years trying to create that strategic plan. And if I had to do it all over again, we would have started off with something like that, start off with the goals, start off with a strategy, and then kind of systematically, knock off those programs and projects so that it's efficient.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction. Any questions or comments?
So we have Laura, one of our members, Laura Getz, has joined us, and she used to be head of the energy department for the county of Pueblo. And so Laura, anything you want to add to that or any questions?
No, I appreciate that because I know every community does it differently. And I had pulled a bunch of different sustainability managers across Colorado, mostly in the Front Range at one point, just to get everyone's perspective on, you know, what do you do? What do you wish you could do more of? How do you wish you could reframe your position if you had the opportunity to do so, or kind of write the script for your position, knowing what you do now. And so I guess just from your perspective, you know, we have in a lot of ways a blank slate here. We have gone through a couple different strategic planning processes. In bubbles though, you know, we haven't done a big comprehensive sustainability planning process. And this is our commission, and what the city is looking at right now is very energy centric. And so I guess, I don't know, from your perspective, do you think it's smarter for the community to try and maybe bring on a consultant to do a strategic plan that, you know, someone could implement? Or do you see bringing on the person to kind of facilitate the process of drawing up that map or game plan for the community based on the resources available?
I think that was a question to Teresa and maybe Jonathan, if you had any insight, right?
Yeah, whomever, sorry.
Teresa pointing at me, and maybe after I answer and Teresa answers, I've got a little presentation as well about kind of Denver and how our office is structured, and then that maybe helps carry on the conversation from there. You know,
yeah. So maybe Jonathan, maybe if it's better to give your presentation, or go ahead and make your comment, and then we can move into your presentation.
Yeah, I'll answer the question first, see if Teresa has anything, and then launch into my presentation. You know, we certainly use consultants in Denver. They can be very helpful in terms of, you know, strategic thinking or helping to dive deep into problems that we might be facing. But if you don't have the staff that are there to then implement those recommendations, then your consultant reports are going to sit on a shelf and nothing's ever going to happen. So I think really, really important to lead with having the dedicated staff people who, you know, this is their job. They need to be the champions of, you know, all things sustainability and you know, creative thinking, to help bring together multiple agencies, because, you know, this is a whole of government problem. And if you don't have someone who's helping to quarterback that, it's not going to happen, no matter how good the recommendations are. Teresa?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And you know, an internal person has the connections to all of your stakeholders. A consultant may not reach out unless they're told to, and then by that time they're kind of acting as like a staff member anyway. So I would suggest if you're hesitant on funding a part-time or a full-time position, you look at like a contract for 3 years and say, this is a position that we're going to see how it goes, see if they can get some grants for us and see what the effectiveness is. I don't really have any doubt that they will prove their worth, and, you know, you'll need somebody full-time. But if that's kind of the hesitancy, I would still go with a permanent staff or a temporary staff position rather than a consultant. I agree with Jonathan. Consultants have their place, and they're effective for a lot of technical assistance and really, you know, bringing in that expertise. But an internal person is going to have all of those connections with you and your stakeholders that they can kind of really be more effective being in-house.
Great. So I'll kind of share screen here and talk a little bit about our office. So Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. I'm the lead for our energy and renewables team. There's me. I do what I do because I, you know, care about this planet. I've got a 8-week-old son, and, you know, really want to ensure that, you know, the world is sustainable for him for years to come. I got started in chemical engineering, was consulting for the US Department of Energy, doing work with states and local governments, helping them write climate action plans. So that kind of last question about, are consultants helpful? I was a consultant. I gave a lot of advice to a lot of people that I don't know if it went anywhere because they didn't have the champions that were in place who could really take it and make the most of it. So that's where some of that knowledge comes from. And now being on the other side of it, I get to use consultants in a way that can be very productive to things that I know that I'll have the resources and the ability to obtain buy-in for throughout the city. So our office really originated with some commitments made by the mayor back in 2018 to reduce GHG emissions 80% by 2050. The community actually said, hey, that's not good enough. At that time, our office was a subdivision within a subdivision of our Department of Environmental Quality within Denver's Public Health and Environment. And so in 2020, a ballot measure was formed asking that, can the city do more? Can we actually create a dedicated office focused specifically on climate action? And can it be resourced sufficiently so that there are staff and ability to launch programs and really try to influence policy and all those things? So fortunately, that ballot measure passed in 2020, and our first Climate Protection Fund 5-year plan was released in 2021. And it sets a even more ambitious target, calling for a 100% reduction in GHG emissions by 2040, which is going to be hard to get to. So we're on a really positive trajectory as it pertains to electricity use, but there's still a gap to reach our goals. I don't have the chart pulled up to show natural gas consumption and transportation emissions, but electricity probably looks the best out of all of the different wedges of our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Transportation kind of flatlines through the end of the decade and is going to require some pretty significant coordination both with the state and the federal level, and really thinking about all the tools that we need to drive that down. So some things we have to recognize, what's in our control versus what do we need to influence. A little bit about our Climate Protection Fund. It's funded by a 0.25% sales tax and raises about $40 million a year. So we are certainly extremely fortunate as far as municipal sustainability programs go. I think Portland is really the only other community in the country that has something of a comparable scale. But as I'll talk about, even with this amount of money, the scope of what we're trying to accomplish is so big that you always feel like you need and can make use of more people, more grant dollars. I spent my entire week working on a grant for the Department of Energy for a solar project that we're working on. But at least having some individuals who are a part of your team, you can really build momentum, identifying those grants, creating, helping to pay for your own salary, and then bringing on other team members and enabling projects that can happen. So my part of our climate action, sustainability, and resiliency, so CASR, as we call it, is down in this corner, energy policy and renewables. But we really break across, high impact carbon reduction, environmental stewardship and natural resources, and promoting sustainability for Denver's businesses and residents. When we think about our energy programs, we focus on these two sets of priorities: decarbonizing our energy use as quickly as possible and maximizing investment in under-resourced communities. I think a lot of us recognize climate change as an existential threat, which it is to our future generations, but there are folks in all of our communities who have much more immediate existential threats. Like, how are they going to make their rent payment that month? Are they at risk of getting their utilities shut off because they're missing bill payments? Are they able to put food on the table? Do they have a safe way to get from point A to point B to get to work or to get to school? So we need to be thinking about all of those immediate existential threats that people face in their daily lives, and how do we come up with climate-friendly solutions, because that'll help with our longer-term decarbonization goals as well. We try to structure our work around energy policy community programs and municipal decarbonization, I like to think of it as policy is transformational. That's how you can really change the whole system. And oftentimes you can have a limited number of people who make a significantly outsized impact through their work. So that's what I would say is the biggest bang for your buck is having really robust policy work. But then, you need to also be inspirational. What are you doing with your own, municipal buildings or your own infrastructures that you control? It might be spending tens of millions of dollars on every year through operations and maintenance or additional capital projects. So those are chances to think about, well, how do we do that a little bit differently so that we can lead by example and show that, for a very small incremental cost or even at cost parity, rather than building our new building with a natural gas hookup, we can do it all electric with heat pumps, and we'll actually save money over the lifetime of that building operating, and we're not making our carbon footprint any worse. So really being an inspiration to all the other, community members that you're hoping to follow in your stead. And then our community programs that is intended to make some of those policy decisions, more equitable, more attainable. If we update our building codes to require that everything is all electric, or that at the end of, a furnace's useful life, it has to be replaced with a heat pump, that comes with a cost. And there might be nonprofits or, affordable housing units that are out there that struggle with some of that. So how do we make sure that we have programs that help support those kind of most vulnerable community members along the way? For policy, there's regulatory advocacy, extremely important. The Public Utilities Commission effectively controls all of our, what we pay for power, where that power comes from, and the rules that govern the system. We work closely with Xcel Energy to try to ensure that our goals and their goals align, and that our mutual investments and everything that we're doing is pointing us in the right direction. And I also mentioned things like building codes or setting building performance standards or executive orders around your municipal operations. Those have been extremely effective for us in influencing the long-term trajectory of our built environment, specifically for codes and standards. So on that importance, commercial and multifamily buildings are just under half of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions. So we've actually just gone through a code update process and should be getting voted on at City Council before the end of this year. That will really put us on the trajectory of net zero energy by 2030 and beginning to impose electrification requirements for commercial and residential properties. And there's another policy that was implemented for existing buildings that requires things like electrification of space and water heating, implementing LED lighting, and reducing overall to the regular advocacy specifically. There are dedicated people who work on building codes, who work on building performance. My team kind of manages our collaboration with Xcel, and we have a dedicated individual on our municipal decarbonization strategy. So how do we make sure that we're powering our facilities with renewables, installing EV charging at every city facility where it makes sense? And there are a lot of grants out there right now from the feds to help with EV infrastructure build out. Working with our facility managers to try to understand, what types of equipment are the easiest to electrify. Things like rooftop units are a lot simpler than central boilers or buildings that we have on our district steam loop. And then just generally, how do we implement energy efficiency measures, things that pay for themselves, or using energy performance contracts where you can get an outside party to pay for all of your energy improvements, and then they get paid back based on your savings. So identifying those low or no cost actions that can be implemented are extremely helpful. And when I started with the city, we did not have the Climate Protection Fund. We did not have very many resources. So everything was focused on how do we get others to pay for things for us, and then use our utility cost savings to effectively, pay it back. Our community programs, we try to have a little something for everybody, recognizing that there might be renters, homeowners, nonprofits, businesses, schools, different stakeholders that we're trying to reach. We have municipal property where we recognize we can host solar, and we've done it in a way where we can actually share that power between the host facility, so that rec center, and local low-income households. So we can donate, in some cases, up to 80% of the power from our solar projects to help low-income renters save money on their utility bills or avoid that dreaded situation where they might get disconnected. Our solar co-op is a group purchase program. We work with a nonprofit, Solar United Neighbors, and they effectively help all community members through, how can you go solar, and help people get a discount from a local installer by kind of going solar in bulk. We have a program targeted specifically at nonprofits where we want to help food pantries, affordable housing providers, folks that provide critical services to their community, give them solar, give them battery storage, give them things where they can reduce their operating costs and ideally keep the lights on through no matter what type of emergency event or situation, so that they're more resilient and able to continue to support vulnerable communities that depend on them. We have a rebate program, so that's a little something for everybody. A lot of people voted for our office. There's a lot of taxpayers that pay into our fund, and we need everybody to be willing to participate. No matter what your income level is, we still hear from people that they would install a heat pump, but it's just too expensive, or they would do this or do that, but compared to the cost of the status quo furnace or whatever it might be, why would they do that? Now with the Inflation Reduction Act, there are significant rebates, tax credits, and things available. The state also has a 10% tax credit for heat pumps and related technologies. Xcel Energy has rebates. So we're looking at this as what's the value stack that we can create, try to keep our costs as low as possible, but still encourage people to take that next step to help be a part of Denver's energy transition. And then last but not least, working with schools. I think really important that we're working with the next generation, helping to educate them on the challenges that we're facing and how do we come up with practical, equitable, cost-effective solutions, and really try to inspire that next generation to come and be a part of it. Our community solar program, we recognize that these types of investments in kind of city-directed infrastructure solar projects can also create multiple community benefits. So we try to put that community back in community solar. I talked about how we donate power to low-income households, but we're also working with Denver Public Schools on internships, field trips, and classroom activities. We worked with a nonprofit to do a hands-on solar installation training for students at a local high school. 10% of our workforce is going to come from a training program. And as we identify households that might need help paying their utility bills, or folks that participate in our job training program, we might also be able to connect them to other services that are funded by the state, things like free energy efficiency upgrades, appliance rebates, cash assistance, you name it. So trying to not reinvent the wheel, but connect people to services that are already out there, and sort of enhance those programs and pull them into ours where we can. So at the end of the day, we want to share the social, economic, and environmental benefits of clean energy across Denver. So seeing our own, community solar projects that we hosted on city facilities pop up in as many neighborhoods as we can, investing in the nonprofit groups around the city. So there's only 4 shown here, but we now have 7 signed contracts, and then working with schools throughout the city, and particularly those in under-resourced communities, to help them and inspire students. So everything that we do needs to be complementary. I think, extremely important to have dedicated staff. As you can see from, what's going on in Denver, there's a lot that can start to happen. And certainly, when you're just getting a program up and running, one person is going to have enough on their plate as it is, just thinking about, 1 or 2 grants to go after, coming up with some strategic thinking and really focusing on policies that can bring the community forward. But then as you start to, receive grant dollars and have the ability to implement more programs, those can help pay for your staff time and can help to achieve these various impacts of driving down greenhouse gas emissions, improving climate, addressing climate vulnerabilities, being a leader and innovative, and thinking about equity in a multifaceted way where it's economic, it's public health, and it's direct engagement where, as I talked about earlier, thinking about how do we solve community problems with climate-friendly solutions, where someone might care a lot more about, oh, this program helps me get to work, but at the same time, it's a carbon-free way that gets them to work. Things of that nature. So that is it from me, and I can share these slides, and hopefully that was helpful to get a sense of some of the work that we're doing in our office.
That was great. Thank you. And do share the slides. I think if you send it to Alyssa, that it'll get to our commission. I had a question for you about your community solar gardens. Are you working with Excel to do this, or is this city-owned solar gardens? How does that work?
Yeah, so we have to request permission from Excel to connect to their grid, but it is a city-owned project. So originally, this goes back to 2019 when I started with the city. We had no budget, no money for this. We recognize that there are community solar developers that are out there looking for places to put their projects, and they'll pay landowners a monthly lease fee to say, hey, do we have permission to put our solar here? If so, great, we'll pay you a monthly fee, $1,000 per acre or whatever it might be. So our idea was, well, we have rooftops, we have parking lots, let's waive the lease fee, tell the developer that, hey, you can put your solar project here. We want to buy 80% of the power, and we want you to make sure that 20% gets back to low-income households. And we'll do it, you don't have to pay us a lease fee, and we'll fit the definition of what Excel has for a community-based project. So you get some special consideration as to whether or not your project is approved to move forward. And everybody wins. The solar developer gets to build their project. Denver gets to advance our clean energy goals. We get to buy clean power, and we get to see these benefits happen to the community. Very fortunately, our sales tax initiative passed as this project has been under development, and it's actually cheaper for us to just pay the capital cost to own the projects outright rather than buy the electricity back from the solar developer, because they have investors, they need to make a certain return on investment. And so our margin of electricity cost savings for doing it with that approach was very thin versus, we expect to fully pay back our project in about 10 years for the capital costs, which again, for a lot of folks, that's a long time. And I know that, we're very fortunate to have the resources that we do. But there's a lot of ways you can approach it of either, buying the power directly from the solar developer at a particular rate, which you just need to compare to what you pay Excel, or you can, get a loan from a financial institution, or, identify community resources or public donations that, might help to make those types of projects whole.
Okay.
So Ken, Jonathan and Teresa, let me just interrupt for a second. This is Stephen Rocky. We have Andrew Hayes, he's our Public Works Director for the City of Pueblo, and also John Behill, he represents Black Hill Energy, our commercial and residential electric provider for Pueblo, and have joined in. So I just want to make sure that they both know that Teresa is from Fort Collins and Jonathan's from Denver. All yours, Ken.
Teresa's from Golden.
Golden, I mean, sorry. Sorry, Teresa.
And I believe Black Hills Energy does have a community solar program. It's I think, structured differently than Excels, which us being an Excel service territory, I'm much more familiar with, but I'm sure your partners over at Black Hills can help talk about community solar and whether that might be a good option for the city.
Yeah, actually, we had that conversation with them about how to take, our municipal buildings all renewable energy. So, I just wanted to kind of understand how Denver did it, and by owning it, outright, does sound like, it's better for Denver.
And we certainly have a diverse strategy where right now about 10% of our municipal operations will be have their needs met through community solar subscriptions, including the ones that we own and operate. We're targeting about 10% that'll be rooftop projects that connect directly back to our buildings. And the benefit with those is, we're really trying to target things like rec centers that double as emergency shelters or other facilities that have some kind of critical resiliency or critical infrastructure type purpose, where we can try to couple them with battery storage or other solutions in the future. And really the vast majority of our clean power comes from Excel's programs like Renewable Connect, where they build a big utility scale project and we subscribe to it, receive a certain percentage of that power. And we also consider the clean energy content of the electric grid in our calculations. We looked at it early on as we were developing our plans. Excel has its wind source program where there's already wind that's blowing on the system. It's generating renewable energy credits. And as Denver, we could buy that credit and assign it to ourselves. Now on paper, Denver could be 100% renewable tomorrow if we bought enough renewable energy credits. But in practice, that doesn't actually change the renewable energy content of the grid. That wind was already there. We're just changing who that clean power is allocated to, whether it's available, as part of the system benefit that Excel operates, or it is, only Denver that can claim it. There's still the same amount of carbon that's being emitted. So we decided it might be a waste of taxpayer dollars to just pay more for power so that we could say that we look good on paper. Let's take the money that we would have spent to make that claim and invest it in projects that actually add renewable capacity to the grid, and ideally in a way that can have additional community benefits or resiliency benefits for our facilities.
I don't know, Teresa, is there an opportunity? Is there anything you want to add to the discussion? I mean, just to give you an opportunity.
I'm sorry because, well, first of all, thank you, Jonathan. I thought you had a great presentation, and I did not realize that maybe the board's interested in hearing about programs. I'm available to answer questions about justifying a position. I'm happy to tell you about our other programs for energy, which is mostly moving towards net zero for new construction, electrified new construction for residential and commercial. We do have a couple of community solar projects underway or in the queue for development, and then subsidize some solar investment, solar bulk purchasing programs, and things like public EV chargers, things like that.
Okay. Have you built any buildings net zero, or are there any in the plans in Golden?
It's a good question. I think we have a public stakeholder process right now to amend the building code to include electrification for new buildings and new construction. And I would expect that our advisory committee is going to, and planning commission are also going to send a joint recommendation to city council here shortly to adopt a policy of electrified new city buildings on a kind of a more aggressive schedule than the private sector. We do have some upcoming plans for potential new city hall, new fire department. And I guess I would expect that the the appointed boards would probably want to see the city be in a leadership position of making those net zero or electrified. Just don't know where they're going to land yet. And they're probably scheduled to have that recommendation done by the end of this year.
Thank you.
Yeah, it would be of interest to us to kind of stay on top of, how you code, how you building codes are progressing. Pueblo is a little different because we kind of combine with the county in a, and kind of have a separate organization to do the permitting and inspection. So I don't know. Is there anything, Andrew, about the codes that we'd want to understand?
So your point is spot on. We've can say, and I guess that through regional here, we've adopted building codes according to by city ordinance, and the county has also adopted those on the county level. But regional enforces according to the jurisdiction that they fall in. The county does make separate amendments to the code. They can be different than the cities per se, but it gives regional a hard time when they're certainly enforcing two different sets of rules. So it'd be great to have something universally, I guess, enforceable there. Right now, clearly, there's nothing out there that is pushing for net zero for commercial and private construction. Within our group here, we've talked about as a city trying to establish some construction standards that require net zero construction for city facilities or certain types of city facilities. But we haven't gotten to that point of I don't think pushing for private development to do that same thing. So that's kind of where we're sitting. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, no, that's good to get your comment. A couple things going on in Pueblo. They're building some new fire stations. I think 3. Is that correct? And we've pushed to have those to be net zero buildings. And then there's a transportation facility that's in the plans. The regional transportation building is going to be rebuilt, and those are upcoming buildings. Again, as the commission, we're requesting those to be net zero. And I think we're in the process of actually achieving that for these fire stations. Is that true, Andrew?
That's correct. So right now they're in design, and so the design firm that's we've engaged is looking at the net zero design options there. So
and it's kind of speaking as an individual, it's my hope that those fire stations will be net zero and they won't need natural gas. So we'll set the example as a city on how to do that type of commercial building. There are some commercial buildings here in Pueblo. Our Pueblo
Community Health Center.
Community Health Center is a net zero building, and it's a fabulous facility. So we have an example of how to do it. It's just that we want the city now to kind of follow that standard. Jonathan, you had your hand raised.
That's really exciting that you guys are all moving in that direction. We certainly are as well. We've got our first net zero facility that we're building with Denver Parks and Rec that should come online some point next year. One of the things that we're finding though is just, okay, well, how do we most effectively provide heat for that building? And then also what are the impacts, citywide? If every single building is going towards heat pump technologies, all right, we've found that based on the summer peak of electricity use, the peak load on Excel's grid in the summer is a lot higher than the peak load in the winter. That's because there's a lot of air conditioning units and a lot of electricity that's used for cooling, whereas gas is typically used for heating. So there's this gap that we can try to take advantage of providing more of our heating load with electricity. So if every AC unit becomes a heat pump, and it's using electricity to cool in the winter, but it's also using electricity to heat in the summer. So there's certainly capacity on the overall grid to help us with our goals. Reasonably, we found that about 50% of our buildings could be electrified. But what we are also finding is that at the very local level, and I'm sure your reps at Black Hills can tell you about this, there might be very specific or acute impacts that happen down on the distribution system, where a transformer needs to be upgraded or the electrical panel of the building needs to be upgraded, especially if you're not just, say, replacing your cooling system is now using an equivalent amount of electricity in the winter for heat. Heat pumps can only heat to a certain temperature. Cold climate heat pumps, they can go down to -10 degrees or -15 degrees Fahrenheit in some cases, but Excel still designs their grid to be much more resilient than that. They look at a 30-year history to see what was the coldest day of that 30-year period, and that's what they need to design the system to, so that things don't break. So even though you've got your cold climate heat pump that can go down to -15, you may still be required to have an electric resistance backup or a natural gas backup or some other kind of heating system that can cover you at that time. So we've been going with ground source heat pumps for our new construction because those are using the ambient temperature of the earth, and it becomes a much better or more reliable heat source. Even on the coldest day that is reasonably imaginable, you're still going to get the heat that you need through your heat pump to keep your system operating efficiently on the system without triggering those upgrades. So for new construction, that's becoming our default. For existing buildings, it gets way more complicated if you don't have the space to, drill a bunch of, bore fields into the ground to run a bunch of tubing for your geothermal well or ambient loop to be, providing power to your system. We're writing, again, a couple grant applications to the Department of Energy to help us try to explore creating district heating loops with ground source wells to help provide power to existing buildings. But we're also trying to work really closely with Excel on, all right, if we can't, do it with a heat pump alone, and we do need electric resistance backup, can we design or upgrade our electrical panel in a way so that we don't need to upgrade the service to the building, which might trigger, new transformers, new equipment, new power lines even. Can we set it up so that certain electrical circuits on our building can never operate at the same time? So that way we have much better management of the demand that building is pulling. So we don't want to design the grid so that every single piece of equipment is operating at 100% full bore, which is kind of what they have to do now from a reliability perspective. But how do we make sure that only the critical loads might operate on that historic coldest day of the past 30 years, where it'd be unreasonable to assume that you're going to do that and be charging vehicles and be running 1,000 microwaves in a multifamily housing complex, you name it. So those are some of the complexities we're facing and how we're approaching it right now. And Teresa, I saw your hand up if you want to elaborate.
Jonathan, one thing you didn't mention the thermal blanket of the buildings. I talked to our building department here in Pueblo County, and I'm sure Denver's doing it already. They're bringing up the codes, almost doubling, and then lessening the window amounts. And I ran into a builder that's been building zero residential ones on there. And his joke is the pilot light on a furnace will keep that building warm now. And you didn't mention geothermal, and I know it's kind of a laugh. And just to let you know, I'm retired from Excel Energy. I was electrical distribution engineering, so I know what you're talking about. When we went out, and I would meet with them and look at their plans and see what their loads are, and make sure we have the transformation and available for that load. But I think the big point that I didn't see you include is that in batteries, but the new thermal energy requirements for zero energy buildings is, and it's not like we mentioned that our health department has it, but it's full of windows. You really can't have a lot of windows unless you have a thermal shutter that brings that window up to an R30 automatically when the sun stops coming through it, or when the sun is coming through it in the summer. But it's just something to think about, Jonathan, because I think that's a big thing. And then, as you know, the batteries are the big thing. Tesla makes a battery for your home, sits in your garage. Fire stations, I'm thinking that's better. Me being from Excel, I'm used to gas generation, these generations that could be taken out by outside entities. You got a battery inside the station that can run your whole communication systems and life sustaining systems. It's better, but those are just a reminder that I think we need to include that in the discussion. And I'm glad you brought up the geothermal. Without that and the heat pumps, I think you're wasting your time in our climate to a point, unless it's a small house, something like that on there. But anyway, I just wanted to remind that it's such an important, and these are the newest stuff that we got to comply with, or this isn't going to work.
Teresa, come on, we need you to jump in here.
Well, I was thinking of a conversation that's happening a lot in Golden is making the distinction between net zero buildings and electrified buildings, because that does kind of dictate a little bit more of a direction. Net zero is kind of incorporated with Excel's plans to allow continued use of natural gas. And I would say that if you've got existing buildings or even new construction buildings, net zero is a fairly easy hurdle to surmount. Solar can offset a lot of the electricity consumption and kind of create this net zero for electricity position. Golden has about 9 of the municipal buildings that meet that net zero definition. More and more though, our citizens are kind of talking about all electric. And so we're trying to kind of keep those distinctions and those definitions kind of at the top of mind when we're looking at code changes and technology. So all electric does have different implications for your backup system, your redundancy and electric and energy usage. So I think the battery backup and the battery system is something that we're starting to see more legislative advocacy for within the Excel system, and a little bit more furthering of that. But so a lot of what Golden's kind of moving towards is subsidies for some electrification upgrades in areas of technology that is still a little bit more expensive, and then shifting those out of the subsidy as they become more affordable, but then trying to solve that problem of energy redundancy, backup. So right now we're kind of in the heart of having those discussions about getting off of natural gas and answering that question. But that might be an important distinction within your own goals, is whether or not net zero or electrification, kind of is the main intention.
So I have a quick question, because my guess is that you guys have other things to do besides joining us, and we appreciate it. But in relation to the PUC, each of your respective departments representing your respective cities, what's your role working with the PUC? Either one of you.
Yeah, Denver is one of only a few municipalities that takes an active role in PUC proceedings. Typically we see Boulder, and then occasionally there might be kind of joint communities that may file comments. But so my team will take an active intervener status in proceedings that affect rates, the resources that serve us, the programs that we try to participate in. So anything related to renewables or demand side management, electrification of buildings and transportation, energy efficiency programs, and sometimes rules that govern the system or how those programs are implemented. It is a full-time job, to say the least, and also requires some support from our legal team to help with filings. other interveners, they might have their attorneys doing a lot of the work at the Public Utilities Commission because it is a quasi-judicial process. Our attorneys are more kind of administrative support for us and help to answer your questions on procedural elements of kind of the how to participate and what we can and can't do, where our staff and the mayor's office are more attuned to, well, what is the policy direction and advocacy that we want to push for? And then how do we use our own data from our experiences, either participating in programs or trying to offer programs to the community, or installing solar or EV charging, whatever it is that we're trying to do, to provide kind of real world examples of, well, here's what's working well, or here's what needs to change, or here is what we can scale up or otherwise.
Teresa, how about Golden?
I will say I very much appreciate the big cities who have resources to follow that. It's incredibly difficult to keep up with everything. And if I had a dime for every email I got from the PUC on any of these intervening cases, I'd be rich. But we absolutely depend on a couple of other organizations to keep us in the loop and represent Golden. So you kind of have to pick and choose like whose values you might align with. We join Colorado Communities for Climate Action, CC4CA. They hire lobbyists on our behalf to represent us at the PUC, and we depend on their policy analysis. We do testify where it's appropriate. We have some of our city council members who are willing to testify. We also hire periodically some legal assistance, but it's more on the side of being able to interact and work with Xcel Energy directly on some projects. And it's less that they are representing us at the PUC. We kind of just leave it to CC4CA and keep up with them to represent our interests there. We're just too small. We've got 20,000 people, and I'd love to devote time to it, but it would take an army.
Yeah, well, compared to a city that has over 700,000 people, right? Yeah.
So we want to wrap this up for a while. Jonathan, excuse me. I mean, the fact that the time that you've already given us, and the fact that Fort Collins, even though I said, Teresa, you represented Fort Collins, I just didn't join us, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So we appreciate the fact that you've given us almost an hour.
Yes.
And I just want to ask any of my colleagues here on our commission if they have any last questions for either one of you.
I think Laura had her hand up. So.
Laura.
Sure. Yeah, I just thank you so much again for your time and the work you're doing. It's very, I think there's a lot we could take away from the excellent programs you've put in place. But I was curious about your reporting and your communication with the public. What are the most effective strategies you have for communicating your progress and your results with the public? Is it dashboard, website, regular public meetings? What do you find, or a combination of these strategies? What's most successful?
So we use a combination of the strategies. I feel like it's one of those things where we could spend all of our time coming up with reports and just trying to communicate things, but then that would detract from our ability to actually do the work. So it's a constant balance of how much is enough to show people that we're making progress and just really keeping track of those highest level key performance indicators. And then if there are really passionate people that want to come and talk to us about things, then we've got the slide deck already built, or we've got the talking points ready to have those conversations more one-off. I've certainly found that we have a small but vocal group of people who really want to get in the weeds and know every detail, and it's much more effective to just schedule time to meet with them on a semi-regular basis and keep them updated on things. But the vast majority of the general public, a small blurb on our website is more than enough for them. So I certainly don't kill myself trying to have the fanciest dashboard and interactive things for people to go on our website, because they just they won't use it, and the super passionate people, it won't be enough for them anyways. So I just need to make myself available for those conversations.
Good points. We tried the dashboard route. It's expensive and less than useful. the simplistic annual report, or in our case, a somewhat periodic report that hasn't become totally annual yet, has been probably the most effective. A set of metrics that you can easily report on every year. Our basis for our annual reporting is really the Xcel Energy community energy reports that come out at the end of June every year. That's kind of our energy metrics. We also report on waste and water to the extent that we have that information, but consistent, transparent with simplistic metrics is probably my recommendation for the best way to go. And like Jonathan says, if folks want more information, the more you can put on your website about these one-off programs that you might be doing, that helps people understand. You can always point people back to the website, but otherwise it's kind of just a collection of reporting out on individual programs too.
Okay, anybody else? Last questions for our two guests?
Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I encourage you to reach out. We're a small community, both of us, and I'm happy to help with pointing towards grants and opportunities. The small communities, we like to kind of help each other. So thank you for all of the work you're doing. It's great. And thanks to Jonathan too.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And I appreciate both Laura helping and then Ken contacting and getting this set up. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thanks so much. And look forward to, having a conversation, at least, making sure we share ideas. So
Yeah, contact us anytime.
Okay, and Andrew, you got a lot to look at.
Looking forward to it.
Good. All right. Anybody else right now? That was a lot and pretty incredible amount of information. And how many people are we recommending to the mayor to hire?
Well, one thing I saw that was obvious is the mayor said that they had a grant writer that they need to reestablish. So I imagine that job's already there. Because I see this as two different types of person. If you want an energy expert, someone that's going to be with the city to help with retrofits and understand that they need a basically conservation energy, and they also need a solar background and that sort of background. You're probably going to find anybody that's also going to be a grant writer or someone that could represent you at the PUC or to be apply for money for the feds and stuff. I think trying to get those two expertise would be hard. Right. And I think right now what we're looking at is an energy efficiency person that can work with the new fire stations and understand, if they're going to build that way. And then we've found that the biggest low hanging fruit is conservation within the city buildings right now. Whether it's insulation or motors that need to be changed out for more efficiency, windows, lighting, to go through that, because that's something we all agreed at the beginning of this. We could do, right away. It's not that expensive compared to some of the others. And then just one other thing, there's just, like they mentioned, there's tons of grants. And I always hear, every time I talk to someone about these grants, they always say, Southern Colorado doesn't take advantage of this money. And, it's like we either don't look for it or everybody's expecting us to just come to us. But anyway, those are some things I saw.
And I think Laura put together a pretty comprehensive draft of a job description that Alyssa was going to make available, email to everybody, make sure you had a copy of it. But I think that what I'd like to see happen is that kind of a chance for us to kind of digest everything that took place here, and then come back at the next meeting and kind of talk a little bit more about what our recommendations would look like. Right now we're knowing that Andrew has been the lucky one from the city to work with us. And I'm sure he would love to have somebody that the mayor would have hired to kind of take a load off of him, since he has absolutely nothing else to do in public works. So do you, Andrew? You have nothing else to do. But I think that's a key thing. We need a person that, and it looks like the mayor is going in that direction. So I don't know. Anything else about, I need a little bit more time to digest. I took a bunch of notes. I have questions, talking about, the difference between Denver and Golden and where their priorities are. The relation to the energy policy and decarbonation. I mean, we haven't even talked about, we're just assuming by getting to 100% renewable, but we're only talking about the city. I mean, they're talking about the residents, they're talking about commercial buildings, they're talking about automobiles. I mean, that's a vast, more than what we've even had in discussion. So
I think, what we've designed as the Energy Commission, I mean, we're going after a few things. We're going after energy performance contracts. Jonathan mentioned that, basically to improve the city buildings, right?
We are looking at community ones. We already have some, the city does, right?
Well, I mean, Andrew's, doing this energy performance contract for, the buildings that make sense. I assume it's probably a large percentage of city buildings, right?
Are you doing that, Andrew? I haven't heard that.
So we have, we've gotten the green light to proceed with developing the RFP for the energy performance contract. So that'll probably be something that gets vetted out through the rest of this year and probably start in early 23. But ultimately that identifies projects that can be done. And so it's going to build on what we've previously already done. There was an energy performance contract completed back in 2010. And so we don't want to repeat the same exact things, but there are certainly known opportunities right now that I have certain buildings that were not included in that last energy assessment. So there's some things we definitely want to make sure we capture in this one.
Steve? Yeah, are you still looking at the long-term 20-year? As you know, ours were at 8%. Your Denver's getting theirs at 10%, and they're only doing 10% of. When I read their thing, Denver does not recommend those contracts through the utility company. It sounds like that's why they're buying their own. Setting up their own solar community gardens and on their land and things like that, because the length of these, and like Denver, we had 8, Denver's got 10. Next year, somebody else is going to be offering 12% or 30. So if we got a 20-year, I mean,
And keep in mind, I think you're crossing the streams a little bit. We're talking about
the performance. Okay.
Renewable purchases is one thing.
Yeah.
We're talking about energy improvements, energy efficiency improvements in our existing facilities.
Okay.
We've got existing HVAC systems that are
solar gardens. That's why community gardens. No, I understand where you're headed. I'm sorry I wasted your time.
Yeah. So I mean, so we're proceeding with these energy performance contracts, which won't cost the city anything, right? I mean, it costs time.
It costs time. There's opportunity cost, but there is technically, I think, an upfront cost. We have to commit some funds to, but I think in the end that if we accept a slate of projects that pay for that assessment, then there's no cost in the end.
Right.
And upfront, I think there is a little bit.
So the net result of those should be lowering costs, right? I mean, they should pay for themselves, really.
Over the long term, that is true. The initial upfront, there's no savings, right? The savings go to pay for those projects. And then over the long term, you realize a lower energy bill as long as your footprint doesn't change. And you're still managing things the way that they were set up. So yes, over the long haul, there is energy savings, and the resulting cost savings goes to pay for those projects that are implemented.
And I would hope that those things would maybe, corporations might, that haven't done this would kind of see it and say, hey, we need to do that with our facilities, right? They probably already have, because corporations are really trying to save costs. The net zero buildings for the fire stations would be a great achievement for the city too. To show what future buildings should look like for everybody. So we get the idea. I see this as a journey, right? Over the next 20, 30 years, we're going to stop burning carbon-based fuels because they emit greenhouse gases. the goal is to get to zero greenhouse gas emissions, right? So you can't burn natural gas, you can't burn petroleum in your car. We're gonna go all electric. One of the things that I think we need to talk with other communities about is how do you support the low income folks? So, it's energy justice piece, so we don't leave people behind in the transition.
Was talking about.
From a I guess the city's already committed to EV, to converting over to EVs for all their new vehicles. So, there's another piece. How do we make sure that we have the right amount of chargers? When we do get this person in this job of supporting the energy justice or climate issues, I think what I picked up from this meeting was that we really need to do have a strategic plan in place, right? I don't know if it's really up to us. Maybe that person could derive a strategic planning process, and we just participate as an interested group. I want to go to Edgy's comment about solar gardens, right? I mean, because I'm scratching my head. Do these really make sense, right? Because they don't really give you a big bang for the buck. In other words, if you wanted to sign up for a solar garden, I mean, I think we all could, right? Even as consumers or just resident, we can sign up to a solar garden and get an 8% discount in our bill. Okay, it's 8%, but you have to sign up for 20 years. I think we need to understand, Black Hills would be happy to provide this for us. But it may be better, like Denver has decided, to own it. So I think, we need to go through that bidding process. I don't know how you do it to kind of figure out what's the best proposal.
Well, they said, they said tax, they got a tax increase just for that sort of thing. And then also bonds. She didn't bring up bonds, but city can have bonds where you and I can, and they'll guarantee us 5%. We'll give them, we'll get 100 people, we'll give them $1,000 each, and now you got $100,000.
I think it boils down to the question: you want to rent or do you want to own?
I think you want to own. You could lease. I'm sure somebody's going to start leasing them, but as you see, Denver says it's a 10-year payback. As utilities go up and things, there may only be 5 years. We'll have to wait and see how this all goes. And then also the efficiency of it. If we could change our buildings, like we're trying to do through this, with you and Andrew were talking about, so you can make all the city buildings more efficient, 50% more efficient. Then you include the purchase of solar or leasing panels on that. But I think the way to do it is to buy it and own them, and the lifespan of them is so much better now. And even batteries, if Excel's going to get, 250 megawatts of power from batteries, that woke me up right away. That's almost what one of these units out here at Comanche runs. And so that's another thing. You can bring batteries into this, too. And again, you heard Denver talk about the state's giving rebates for batteries, for solar, for hot water heaters, for all this stuff. We need to take advantage of that. And that's why we need that person that's doing that.
Right. And let me just kind of draw this, since it's our time, that, and Marty, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to hear from you. It might not be too late, but I just want to make sure that we have kind of continue with the focus. We want to be able to advise the mayor in terms of this position, that there's a commitment now to move forward with that. I think we already have things in the works. I think we've already shown in the year we've been in existence that we've made some progress. I mean, Andrew's on board and he's working on projects. I think the key thing now is for that position. And I think we need to talk about what that should look like. and make some strong recommendations to the mayor. And we have that job description. Everyone ought to take a look at that. I mean, we're not Denver. I mean, I can only imagine how many staff there are in that department in Denver. I think Golden, Teresa was a reality check for us that, you know, that presentation that Jonathan had, my God, that, I mean, it was like, holy cow. I mean, that'd be great if we're in Denver, but we're not. We're in Pueblo.
I
And
think Golden would be a better example.
yeah. So, but I think it was good to see what the scale is taking place in our state. So I would hope next meeting, Alyssa, we'll get together and I'll visit with some of our colleagues here and we'll put together the agenda, but I think we want to make sure that we get that position, kind of a recommendation for that.
And I do just want to say, I think that is a pressing task and an important task for us, but the more pressing one is going to be potentially intervening on this Black Hills Clean Energy Plan. You know, because Excel covers so many communities, there are a lot of different interveners who can intervene on behalf of other communities, and they all share the same interests. In Pueblo, we have nobody advocating on our behalf right now. There's nobody. The county they spent a lot of money doing it, but it was worth it in the end. And so, you know, I would love to see the city step up and become an intervener, because this plan is so critically important to our goal and to the future of our rates. And it can also incorporate things like community solar gardens. Right now, we would not have the ability to own our own community gardens, but there might be room in this plan for us to carve out our ability to do that. You know, if we intervene appropriately.
Why can't we own our own, Laura? We could easily go to Black Hills and just like you and I as a company could go to Black Hills. The city went to Black Hills, they could not deny the city from having a solar garden that we could resell to other people.
No, it wouldn't. The way it's set up is, if it's not covering our own meters, we can't do it on behalf of other people's.
Well,
right.
We'll get into that, but you and I'll talk later on that. But I don't think Black Hills can treat us, the city, different than they could.
So
We would have to bid as a third party against all the other private providers.
Well,
we might not be selected, and so we couldn't get into the weeds of that. But
so we'll talk later.
So let's wrap this up. Excuse me, Ed, Laura, you've made that recommendations. What's the time frame that, I mean, again, do we have the ability, like Edgy, you and Ken are going to go in front of the PUC and intervene on behalf of the city of Pueblo? Do we need some legal input into that? I mean, I kind of it was interesting listening to Denver in terms of what their capabilities are, the attorneys that they have versus what Golden has, that they don't have that ability. They go outside to get other groups. So what's the time frame that you're looking at with this?
So John Vigil said he would email us the timeline for that plan. And depending on what that timeline is, the city, I would recommend the city bring on a legal team to review it and to help make that filing. I think that is beyond our scope and our capability. Yeah. We can provide parameters and things that we're very concerned about that we would like them to look at. Okay, so we have a very, very tight turnaround.
So let me just interrupt. Andrew, is that something you can address to the mayor on behalf of this committee?
I can raise that question.
Okay.
I think it's dual front. I think the legal front is an important piece of this, right? But there's also the technical. So there's a pretty thin line here for particularly with respect to utility commission filings and that sort of thing. So I think we're going to need some help on a couple of fronts there.
Yeah, so I agree with Laura, by the way. I mean, Black Hills has this 2030 plan. They presented it to the commission a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
It wasn't well attended by the commission. Well, they're going to go out and make $1.7 billion in investments. Okay, they're going to keep their rates, their bills. Let me clarify. Their bills flat until 2030. Okay, but then there's a caveat at that 2030 date, which still happens to be the franchise renewal date too. Okay.
To pay
So-
for
Yeah,
Yeah.
So, I think we need to understand that in great detail and what they're wanting to do. And also, like Laura says, is that maybe we need to have some carve outs for, some renewal investments that are more advantageous to the consumer, to the customer than they are to Black Hills.
You talking about the city does
Well, I'm
have carve outs, like through our franchise agreement, is that?
again, the energy justice piece, how do we provide renewables? How do we electrify low-income homes, right? How do we give them cheap renewable energy to use?
So let me, again, I just want to try to keep on track here. Ken, I'm sorry but Laura, Andrew, what do you think about, should we have a special meeting in 2 weeks and just talk about this? If Andrew had a chance to visit with the mayor and also our legal department and kind of come together just for a meeting to talk about what that would look like and what the time schedule is. We don't have to wait till next month. We can try to set up a meeting, Alyssa, within a couple of weeks if we can get the mayor on board and also the law department.
Well, maybe we should
That-
find
That the
out.
timeline that Alyssa posted here, I don't know if you can see it in the chat, but supplemental direct testimony, September 12th. So
That's Monday.
That's tomorrow. That's tomorrow
That's
morning.
Monday. And
in our-
also,
in our
just so
timeline.
you know, the mayor leaves to South Korea this weekend. So it would have to be tomorrow if you wanted to speak with him.
Okay.
Let's,
What is Black Hills scheduled that you have to reply by?
September 12th. Oh, and then their response to testimony. So the testimony says September 12th, and their response to the testimony is November 4th.
Well, obviously that's not going to happen.
So I wonder if maybe we can ask our legal team if there's a process for asking for an extension. I know this happens a lot. Say we need more time to gather notes and be prepared to properly testify.
Andrew, can you ask that?
let me do that. Let me start with that and just see where we can get.
And then through Alyssa, we can get the word back out to all of us.
Laura, I mean, clearly it sounds like you've poured through this a little more than I have. So if there are specific technical or concerns or structural concerns that we need to raise to start focusing some attention on, it'd be helpful to know where those are. And then we can like I say, start the request for an extension if that's possible.
So Laura, you'll assist Andrew?
Yes, yeah. happy
Okay,
to.
great.
You can point me in the right direction.
Andrew, thank you.
You got it.
And thank you, Laura, too.
Yeah.
And thanks, Laura.
And thank everybody else.
Yes.
And adios. Keep us posted. Alyssa. Thank you. My head
There's some
is
things that
swimming.
you'd have fun
That was
talking
like
about
your
because if those buildings are heading towards.
You just happen to have.
Some people call them
Well,
zero
yeah,
energy buildings, some people call them net zero.
This gentleman-
And then the heat pump
So what happened to Alyssa? What happened to Alyssa?
with the geothermal, you mentioned that just means they're gonna go into the ground. And the geo is really simple when you think about it. They want you to go 100 feet either down or 100 feet, like say you wanted to do it at your house.
Well,
You can trench around and they want you to get down to the earth about 60 degrees.
I figured that's what it was.
And you see where that's
We don't know
beneficial
what
because in
happened
the
before.
winter, boy, if you can have 60 degrees of
Anyhow,
snow.
gosh, it was just
You
like
know,
that.
it'd be like if your furnace had something that's 60 and you want to get to 70, that's the reason. Well, air conditioning, on the other hand, if it's 60 degree water, it goes through a heat exchanger. And then you want to be 70. So both ways, it was really good. And then,
Wasn't urgent.
Right.
and this is kind of fun. And
Teresa
when I looked
probably
at these energy buildings, like I mentioned,
presentation.
you'll see some builders, residential.
She said something on
And that's
that.
probably
order that
commercial.
She had was
But
more prepared
You
to talk.
know, it's gonna be
about
hard, like
it.
for a fire department right now. I told you, I was all my year with the
So and
fire
you
department
met Ken.
plants and stuff, but It goes really for everyone. The fire stations are like a big house, they really are. They're, 4 people, but capable of 8, I think is what I read in the.
Okay. All right, guys, I hate to.
Plans for, but,
I hate to be so bossy, but.
The idea is like, for example, you tell the fireman, you don't get a big window like this, you're gonna have, one of those upper slit windows. And that's what you're gonna do. Yeah, well, I can't live like that. That's, or like with the cooking, one of the guys, well, if I don't have a gas range, it's a no go. And so it's what I refer to as like if we go to Home Depot and you bring this faucet in and you say, I don't know.
Well, we're kind of still developing that.
Well, you need this kit. No, I want this. Well, you go home with that and you find out you need what you need. And companies run into that all the time.
Has more value that way.
And I just, especially in my position, with 140 of these
All right.
type A personalities, I just know. We're not gonna do it right, and I'm just gonna hear complaints.
Well, and another thing, and they didn't,
And the other half will love it.
they all state, well, it's gonna cost more to have zero energy. Well, I'm used to the gas side, the gas side, your furnace, you gotta have outside air brought in, all the plumbing and everything. We go hire a plumber, $50, $60 a month. You go put solar in your house, you think they got 50, 60 hour guys on top of the roof with solar, not $16, $17. And then, even put that generator outside, whether it's natural gas, and you got to plumb it in, into the electrical versus right there. It's all added expense. And if you look at people that really design it, they say it shouldn't cost you any more to go at zero. But you know how that goes. You go to the engineer, let's say I'm 2 bids on one part of it. One regular building. One with zero. Oh, it's gonna cost you. It's just like if you go in a car, well, I want a car, but I want the sun right here. Yeah. But yeah, I enjoy talking about this, as you know, it's my thing, and especially since it's a fire station, my heart is into that. And
What's interesting, that's still.
it's not like going to somebody's house and develop the objectives. And batteries is especially. In fact, it would be not only that road, but. Hey, let's see, Joe.